Welcome to the October 14th, 2025 meeting of the City Finance Committee. Can I get a roll call, please?
Yes, we'll start with Committee Member Santa Maria,
Here.
Vice Chair Harmon,
Yes, or here.
and Chair Friedman.
Here. Great. We do have two items before that. We have general public comment. Are there any members of the public who wish to speak to items not on today's agenda, but under the purview of the Finance Committee? Not seeing, everyone else is here for item 2, I assume. And then nobody online?
Chair Friedman, no hands are
Okay,
raised.
I will close general public comment. We're going to hear item 1, and then when we get to item 2, I'll make some comments just in terms of how the hearing is going to proceed at that point, and we'll go from there. So item 1 is the budget adjustment resolution for Measure C. I'll turn that over to Mr. DiMartini.
Great, thank you so much, members of the committee. My name is Keith DiMartini, the Finance Director, and I'm going to call Mr. Brad Hess, the Project Manager for this project in Public Works, who's going to give an overview and the status of the new police building project, where we are today, and the justification for the budget adjustment that staff is recommending at this time. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. DiMartini, and thank you, Chair and committee members. Appreciate it. Glad to be here. My name is Brad Hess. I'm the Principal Project Manager for the city, overseeing the police station project. And with me, I have Derek Troya, who is our construction manager with the Tynan Group. And I'm going to do just some intros, some brief history, go through a couple photos, and then I'm going to turn it over to Derek. So the police station project, as you know, has finally started construction. It's been a long time coming, and in spite of the rain, it's, you know, that frequent rain that we have, still things are going forward, which is great. Again, as you know, this project started with Measure C passing, and this project was the primary project, aside from infrastructure, on the ballot that the voters approved. That's when I started, actually, is about April of 2018. So it's really great to see the building going up after 7 years. So we had some unforeseen issues at the beginning of this project. So we are here with the request that the Finance Committee recommend approval of the appropriation of $4.7 million of Measure C money to the project to replenish the contingency for the project and to cover some unforeseen owner-furnished items, which Derek will cover. So if you look at this first photo, this is the Coda commuter lot without trees. And it's taken from just above the driveway off of Coda Street. Next photo, please. And this is what it looks like today. This is after excavation taken from the corner of Coda and Santa Barbara Streets. And then the last photo is a drone photo taken above the Anacoda building, basically looking east. So you have, you can see two separate areas of the site, with Santa Barbara Street at the top running left to right or right to left. You have the police station building up at that end, and then at the bottom of the photo is where the parking structure will be. So for now, I'll turn it over to Derek, and he'll take care of some of the details that I'm sure you're interested in.
Thank you, Brad. Good afternoon, all. As a summary of this request here, we had encountered some impacted soil on this project, some contaminated, non-hazardous soil. That was as a result of the Environmental Health Department request to sample the soil. We conducted about 60 samples throughout the site and determined that the artificial fill that was in place at about 7-foot depth up to the surface was impacted. That soil was subsequently removed and hauled off to landfills in San Luis Obispo and Kettleman City. In order to accomplish all of that, we had to use our contingency funds. We used about, the initial expectation was about $7 million. And through collaboration with our team and our trade partners, we were able to reduce that to about $4 million. And so that was a success for our team there with a minimal impact to our overall project schedule. However, that leaves us in a position now where we've used, that was about 40% of our project contingency that was used within the first 2 months of our project, which is an excessive amount for that period of time. And so the request today is to replenish that money from Measure C funds. With that, any funds, that brings our contingency back up to a normal place. We've had other items in that contingency get used as a typical project would, and we're not asking for replenishment of those. This is strictly related to soil, with 2 additional items related to kind of these other unforeseen conditions. One of them is a water line relocation on Santa Barbara Street to bring the water line out of the police station building and put it into the right-of-way. And another one of those is a microgrid controller to facilitate our net zero capacity of this building. In total, that request is $4.7 million coming from Measure C. As a reminder, at the end of the project, in September of 2027, any contingency funds that are not used will be made back available to the city there. So that is a summary of what I have. Any questions?
Great, thank you for the presentation. Any questions from my colleagues? Not hearing any, and thank you for the clarification that part of the request is to replenish the contingency. So we're already paying for that out of the current contingency. This would just go through the project, so it might not even all be used at some point. We'll see, hopefully that's the case. And any members of the public wish to speak to this item? Please come forward. Are there any members online that wish to speak to item 1?
Chair Friedman, no hands are raised.
All right, so I'll close general public comment and turn it back to my colleagues. We do need approval for the staff recommendation.
Thank you. I'll move approval.
Is there a second?
Second.
Motion's been made and seconded. All in favor?
Aye.
Aye. No opposed, no abstentions, passes unanimously. Thank you for that. All right, now we are on to the big item for the day, item number 2. So just to lay the groundwork, if you would like to speak to this item, some of you have already turned in slips, go ahead and turn them in right now. And if you'd like to speak online, please raise your hand in the app. I'll hold open public comment for those who come in a little bit later till the end of the presentation. I'll do one last call for members who want to speak. And being that we don't appear to have that many right now, it looks like we'll probably keep the full 3 minutes. But that could change if we get a flux of people, but we'll monitor it. So with that, we will turn it over to Mr. DeMartini for the staff presentation.
Great. Thank you so much, Chair Freeman, members of the Finance Committee. Again, my name is Keith DeMartini, the city's Finance Director. I'm here with Ms. Natalia Glusek, the city's Budget Manager, and it is our pleasure to present an overview of the city's general fund multi-year forecast and to provide some updates to that forecast. The request to the Finance Committee today is to receive a report from staff regarding the update to the general fund multi-year forecast and also provide direction to staff regarding revenue generating and expenditure control options to help balance the general fund budget in both fiscal years 2026, which is the current fiscal year, and also the forecast for next fiscal year 2027. The agenda for today's presentation will be first giving an overview of the general fund multi-year forecast. We've done quite a lot of work over the years with this committee and with the full city council about discussing and prioritizing ways to generate revenue as well as controlling expenditures. So we just want to kind of remind folks about some of that recent work. We also have a very long list of staff recommendations for your consideration today. There's a detailed attachment to your Finance Committee agenda report, which lists all of those individual ideas, and Ms. Glusek will review the various categories of recommendations that are before you today. We'll make our request to the Finance Committee and then open it up for questions, public comment, and discussion. So first part of the agenda today, let's talk about the general fund multi-year forecast. And we thought it would first be good to kind of remind the public about the recent passage of Measure I, which was a half-cent sales tax measure that the voters approved back in November of 2025. It will generate just over $15 million annually for our city's general fund. That measure was approved to maintain existing essential services for this community. So it's paying for police officers and firefighters and librarians and park maintenance workers and also housing. There's an allocation to the local housing trust fund. So essential services that this community expects from the city. It helped solve an immediate budget issue, an immediate funding gap, but it is not going to be the permanent solution to solve all of our budget challenges in the general fund. That was something we made very clear during the campaign and all the public dialogue that we had with community groups about Measure I. And so here we are again. We're back at the table with you, wanting to work with you collaboratively to determine how to proceed with, again, helping us solve some of our budget challenges. This table here shows the general fund revenues and expenditures, showing the last couple of years of actuals. We have a projection in fiscal year 2025 right now because we haven't completed the audit, but we will in short order. And it shows what our budget is in the current fiscal year. And it shows a deficit of a use of reserves of approximately $1.6 million in the general fund. The second line from the bottom is always something I like to highlight because our general fund reserve policy target is 25%. We'll be talking about that in this afternoon city council meeting as well. And so in order to maintain that 25% policy target, because our expenditures continue to grow, we have to put more money into reserve every year. And so really the deficit that I like to speak to is that bottom line. There's a $6 million deficit in the general fund. We've done a little bit of work on an initial projection for the current fiscal year based on a couple months of actual data and recent changes that we're going to note here in just a moment. We believe that the deficit is going to be worse. We think it's going to close to double to around $10 million in fiscal year 2026 and also get worse in fiscal year 2027. So we're going to talk about what we see, what has happened over the last couple of months, and we'll be coming back to this committee next month with more information as well. This is a graph that I know the committee is familiar with. This is our general fund multi-year forecast showing more than a couple of years worth of actual data, our revenues versus expenditures. We have a structural budget challenge, right? Our expenditures are growing at a greater rate than our revenue growth. That is not sustainable. That's why that gap widens in the out years. And you will see a rather large blip upward in fiscal year 26 on our revenues, and that really is the passage of Measure I, showing a first full year of implementation, kind of bringing our budget into alignment. But again, that gap widens in the out years. So let's talk a little bit about what staff is currently seeing in the economy, what we're seeing as far as our revenues and our expenses. First, on the taxes side, we are seeing some softening of our sales tax and transient occupancy tax. Sales tax in particular has not really shown any growth in the last 7 or 8 quarters. So it's been fairly flat. When we see flat tax, that effectively is a hit to us, right? Because our expenditures are continuing to grow. So that's a problem that we have to address. TOT is growing, but it's just not growing at the same rate that we had projected initially. And so we might see a little bit of a shortfall compared to our adopted budget. The next bullet is probably the most significant that we would like to acknowledge, and that is the cost of the recently council-approved collective bargaining agreements with the public safety units, and so police and fire. The cost of implementing those collective bargaining agreements far exceeds the assumption built into the fiscal year 2026 and fiscal year 2027 budget. It's more. We had an assumption of 5% in 26 and 4.5% in 27. The cost is more than that. And so that without a new revenue to help pay for those MOU increases, we dip into reserves. And so that's an issue we need to address as well. FEMA funding is something we're closely watching with the federal government. We are at risk of not getting FEMA disaster recovery money in future fiscal years, depending on what the federal government does. We're going to talk about that in more detail in this afternoon's reserve conversation also. Our costs continue to rise, the cost of insurance, the cost of procuring goods, inflation, all of that continues to drive up costs. And with all of that put together, we will see our reserves deplete more rapidly than we were originally projecting. So let's talk for a moment about reserves. Again, we're going to talk about it in detail this afternoon at the full city council meeting. This graph here shows the last couple of years of actuals, and the different colors of the bar represent the different categories of reserves that we have. By far the largest category is our disaster and our contingency reserves in that blue and green color. And the yellow line is our 25% reserve policy target level. This graph shows that by the end of fiscal year 2026, we are projecting to deplete all of our contingency reserves, all else being equal. And then over the course of the next couple of years thereafter, we will deplete all reserves. And so I show this as a model Staff has modeled this based on current information. We absolutely will not allow this to occur, right? We need to make decisions, again, working collaboratively with Finance Committee and City Council to right this ship and explore revenue generating options and expenditure control options, which is before you today, and we're looking forward to your feedback. It is important to note that another fund has been woefully under reserved for many, many years. That's our self-insurance fund. This helps pay for our insurance premiums for all of our programs, as well as paying out claims that we may have to during the year. The revenue on the top is what our actuary recommends that we have in the fund, and the red line is the actual cash balance in the fund, and it's well below $15 or so million where it needs to be. So this is an area of focus and has been for the Finance Committee over the years. So now I just want to spend a few minutes reminding folks about recent efforts that staff and the City Council and Finance Committee have undertaken to evaluate various revenue options. You may recall the Fiscal Sustainability Initiative and Vision 2030 that staff worked on over the last 2 to 3 years. There was a working group that was established to help evaluate various revenue options. We generated a list of approximately 70 different ways of generating more revenue for the city operations, and we evaluated them based on this criteria listed here. How much revenue could we generate? What are the legal requirements? Is it restricted versus unrestricted? The list kind of goes on. So we really tried to take an objective viewpoint at evaluating how we could generate more revenue. And then we plotted it on this graph. Those that had the highest weighted score and also generated the most revenue were sort of in that upper right quadrant area. Those are the ones that we really wanted to prioritize. And so this first graph is the output of plotting those items for all of the taxes. And as you can see, sales tax sort of rose to that upper right quartile. And that was the one of the first public meetings where council gave us direction to pursue a sales tax rate increase, which ultimately landed on the ballot and was approved. So that was the outcome and the output of that effort. But as you can see, there are other taxes on this list. And those are listed in attachment 1 to your staff report today. So there are other options for us to consider. Also, we plotted other fee changes, primarily around parking. Those are the ones that rose to the top of the list there. So now I'm going to turn it over to Ms. Glusek in just a moment, and we're going to talk about the staff recommendations.
Sorry. Thank you, Mr. DeMartini. So first of all, we're going to define, we went across the city, and I really want to thank everybody in the city who participated in this, which was pretty much everybody. There was so much energy put into this brainstorming. I really appreciate the time and the effort. I can't express that enough. We had well over 200 ideas come in. Several of them springboarded into conversations and generated other ideas. So thank you very, very much. The list that is attached in attachment 1 is a boiled down version of most of those ideas for your review to let us know what we should be pursuing. We did divide those into 3 tiers. The first tier is things that can be implemented fairly quickly. So things that aren't going to take a lot of administrative work to do, they will take it, but we can get them in place fairly quickly. Tier 2, going to take a little bit more time, a little more research, but we still think they're worth exploring and possibly implementing. And Tier 3 are things that we're not recommending at this time, but should be considered in the future. Next slide. I'm going to spend a little bit of time on this first slide just to give a little more color about how this is organized and what you're actually looking at, and then I'll be going fairly quickly through the rest of them. So we have them divided by tier on the top, and then the categories down the side are kind of a larger grouping. Again, these are recommendations that came out as a request for ideas, and the numbers on the right side are a very, very, very loose guess of what we might be able to potentially get at so that we could have an order of magnitude. So things like the sidewalk dining, we can lock that down pretty quickly by looking at the number of establishments, et cetera. Things like pursuing opportunities for commercial property at the airport will take a little bit more research, so you won't see a number there. Fees we adjust every year to try to achieve our cost recovery per the cost recovery policy, but there are some ideas around that. And you will see the bottom one, the last idea in the fees, the waterfront slip fees, and may recognize that waterfront is not general fund, it is a enterprise fund. But again, we're looking citywide, and healthy departments can contribute to a healthier general fund. Next slide. More revenue generating ideas. We had some ideas for rentals. I would like to point out the waterfront event spaces and West Beach type of the rentals. Many of those are predicated on doing some remodeling and some work to get those spaces ready for either larger events or to accommodate various kinds of things like the RV campsites. The reimbursement, looking for reimbursement from the community and other organizations on services that we are putting out there, and also from within the city from other departments. Next slide. Now we have a group of other things that didn't easily fall into one category, which you can see here, including some things that also are predicated on things like the merchandise at the library, increasing those sales. They're looking at kind of reorganizing some of their positions there to have a stronger marketing presence, to bring in more rentals, et cetera. So those would be affected by needing that reorganization to go through. Next slide. Now we have the reallocations. This effort is to take positions and other items that are charged to the general fund directly, and some of the other funds in the city, it may be appropriate to charge them there as well. Sustainability and resilience came up with quite a few ideas out of their Measure B and solid waste. They cannot give all of these ideas. They have a cap of about $600,000, but here are some of the things that we could pursue. And again, other departments, water resources, we may be able to move some positions, change the way that we do our warehouse operations, and concentrate more on water and wastewater. So when there is an emergency, we have those parts on site, and that will be the focus of the warehouse, and not so much the paper and other kinds of things that we can decentralize. And golf has some portion of their administrative staff that is allocated over. It may be appropriate to allocate a little more. We'll have to look at a time study on that. And the airport is also offered to support some positions. Next slide. Changing the way that we look at our purchasing and supplies, including a possible blanket purchase order for fire, which seems like it would increase costs initially, but it could save us on the back end potentially very much, and also with the supply chain time. Next. Looking at how we deal with our fleet and our travel in general, especially the replacement of some small vehicles, looking at vehicles that aren't used as often, and other kinds of opportunities for getting our people around and supporting our programs with those vehicles, as well as parking in general to figure out better ways to support that parking fund. Next slide. A little bit more sensitive area is all of the employee related. We are looking at offering an alternative work schedule, either 4 days with reduced hours, 80% time, 80% pay, and 100% benefits as an option. Also a 4-10 work week to reduce the cost on that overhead of keeping offices open that extra day. Also looking at internship programs, et cetera, and centralizing certain positions, and also looking at transferring some people around and how they're funded. Next slide. Continuing with our employee-related, tweaking people's schedules a little bit. We do have some immediate, those holding positions vacant is an immediate help, but it is not a long-term fix. And a couple other things like hiring freezes are a short-term, but not a long-term fix. Next slide. Other expenditure reductions in the tier 1 are to reduce our number of landline phones. We do a lot of virtual talking to each other on Teams and other formats, so the phones don't get used as often, so that could be a way to do it. I believe we're already in process of retaining an alternate company for codifying stuff. We have to send things out to get properly codified, and that could be a cost savings. Next. Continuing on tier 1, we have some organizational efficiencies that we could achieve. These are a little harder to get at the dollar amounts, but efficiency is generally streamlines things and allows our staff to have more time to do their duties and get things done. So we have some practice changes out there, including the mutual aid, how we account for that, which isn't a monetary savings, but it makes it clearer and easier to track our reimbursement from other municipalities. some reorganization going on, that library reorganization proposed that I had mentioned before. Some of the other ideas for revenue generating may be predicated on that going through successfully, and doing some reviews and looking at our infrastructure for more of a long-term cost savings. Next. Moving on to tier 2, again, these are the things that aren't easily accessible and will need a little bit more review, but we do think are worth pursuing. We have some business development opportunities that we would like to look into, including getting a grant writer to assist with targeting those Prop 4 funds to see who else we can get, who else besides sustainability and resilience might benefit from that. Several ideas around fees to adjust those in order to increase our revenue there. Next. Again, parking, giving a little increase to the parking rates in order to help sustain that parking fund, which will be a relief to the general fund, who is now kind of helping support that fund. Rentals, revisiting that private use in the right of way, some more reimbursement, and several tax-related items, which will take a little bit more time, but are definitely worth looking into. Next slide. And other revenue generating options, you can see above, including having the EV charging network, and that might provide some revenue to the city. A little bit longer term analysis on that one. Next slide. And looking at the reallocations, again, sustainability resilience, offering to take on some of the charges as appropriate, water resources, and also airport. Next slide. Moving on to tier 2 expenditure reductions, again with our fleet and travel, looking at those alternative approaches to managing our fleet, whether that means going and looking at leases for things that aren't being used only in the summer, sharing of cars between departments, et cetera, how we can do that more efficiently. That is actually actively happening. And then again, the employee related, looking at things that would affect our employees and their day-to-day work. Next slide. And in other expenditure reductions at tier 2, looking at not having the library open as long during the holidays, so having a holiday closure or an extended holiday closure. We could close City Hall for in-person services for finance and implement a by appointment only system. We currently do have an appointment system that works extremely well. And then insurance program review, see if we can get some savings there. That's a difficult one. And then sharing services with neighboring jurisdictions, such as the county or other cities, the dispatch and animal control, especially on the borders there. And also modernizing our business tax ordinance, which would be some contract costs that we would be able to issue. Next slide. We have several ideas for reorganization, mostly centralizing the positions. Next slide. And other efficiencies that we might gain in changing our practices, which again may not materialize in a monetary savings, but if it makes things more efficient and loosens up our staff time for other things, we could loosen it up for revenue generating activities or shortening wait times for our clientele in the city. Reviewing some existing contracts and also looking at our infrastructure again for that more long-term savings. Next slide. Tier 3 are ideas that we are not recommending at this time, but we do want to present them. They will take some more time and some more research. Some of these things will not be able to be enacted. We would have to start working on them now, but they would have to be enacted on the next ballot measure, which would be next November, 2026, not 2025. So things like a vacancy tax or an increase to the transient occupancy tax. We're also looking at things such as possible early retirement, which will take some time to look into. And there is an idea to consolidate our county fire with our fire protection services and get some synergy there. Next slide. That's it.
Okay, great. So before we turn it over to the committee, we just wanted to talk about next steps. We also understand there's a lot of information provided to the committee today, a lot of recommendations, so we want to help facilitate and help answer questions. We have staff from all departments that are here that can help clarify as well. We do have a regular Finance Committee meeting scheduled for next week, and it is the same agenda item as today. And so if the conversation needs to continue in some way, you do have that meeting already scheduled next week. We are scheduled to bring the Q1 fiscal year 2026 financial report to the Finance Committee on November 18th. You know how we come to the Finance Committee every quarter to give an update on where the last, couple months of actual data, and we do a projection. And so staff are currently working on our Q1 report right now. And what we will do is we will present direction from you. We will present an update to that as part of the Q1 report, and we will work with staff to help maybe articulate and incorporate some of your feedback into the Q1 report. So it's a more comprehensive report. And then we're scheduled to present the Q1 fiscal year 2026 report to the full city council on December 2nd. And so that's the opportunity for the full city council to hear a financial update about where we think we're going to come in at the end of this fiscal year, and a list of all the recommendations that is sort of prioritized with the Finance Committee's feedback. And again, for this conversation today, we're looking for the Finance Committee's direction on all of the recommendations that are before you today. And what might be helpful to facilitate the conversation is giving sort of your feedback and your direction on prioritization, and maybe also listing which recommendations you do not want staff to pursue, so that staff can understand that and will continue moving forward. So that concludes our presentation. We'd be happy to answer any questions. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Mr. DeMartini and Ms. Gulsek. Before we go to public comment, we're gonna go to public comment, but just for my colleagues, after public comment, just let's consider, since we do have the meeting scheduled for next week, that maybe what we could do is, once public comment is heard, we could close public comment, come back next week with a little direction from our finance department on how to go through these to make the recommendations. Or we could go today if you'd like to, but I'd like to put that as an option and hear what you have to say after that. So give that some thought while we're going through the public comment.
Sure.
Member Harmon?
Excuse me. Thank you, Chair Friedman. I just have what is I think a process question. Is now the right time?
Yeah,
or should I
sure.
wait?
Sure,
Okay,
go ahead and ask
sorry,
questions.
So non-substantive, I promise. So I'm sort of seeing this as a dual track effort, in the sense that there is these overarching budgetary issues and all of these incredible, what an amazing amount of work you did, options for us to give feedback on. And then there's the effort of replenishing the $500,000 that we took. So I kind of, they're definitely related, and I see in the staff report how we got there, but if I can add up to 500K with my recommendations here, am I also making recommendations broadly around ways, so we're doing kind of both, and you're looking for feedback probably in the immediate on the 500K, and then also, what are we going to do for this problem that we're very much obviously in? Is that correct?
Yes, Committee Member Harmon, that is correct. We're looking for feedback on both. And so the action that council took to appropriate $500,000 out of the Flexible Housing Fund sort of started the conversation. And then as we kind of started working through the year, the impact of the MOUs, taxes, right, it required a much more in-depth, comprehensive conversation.
Great. Thank you so much. Thank you, Chair Friedman.
Okay. And so we'll come back for questions, comments, and how we want to proceed for this after public comment. So for those who in chambers who wish to speak, please turn in, if you haven't done so already, please turn in a speaker slip. And then for online, I'll give another 5 minutes or so to raise your hand in the app if you wish to speak. And first up for public comment is Diane Black. Sure. First up, Lisa Carlos. We're flexible here. And we'll keep it at the full
Here we
3
go.
minutes.
Thank you. Good afternoon, Chair Friedman and members of the Finance Committee. I'm going to start with two overarching framing points. First, talking about finances always makes me a little nervous. It's like when my husband comes in with the American Express bill and says, "Lisa, we got to talk." Those conversations are uncomfortable, but they really matter because they're about values and what's most important to us as a city. What are we willing to trade off to achieve it? what's fair, what's operationally smart. When we move money from one need to another, those trade-offs are all things we're going to be talking about in the next 2 meetings, I guess. Second, on any thorny issue, nobody likes surprises or compressed timelines. Process and pacing matters. I'm speaking today in my personal capacity, not on behalf of the housing organizations I'm involved with, because there simply hasn't been enough time to digest, vet, and discuss these materials with the organizations I'm affiliated with. I truly appreciate, however, City Administrator McAdoo and Director DeMartini setting up very educational briefings for us on these budget materials. They really have been informative, and they've spent a lot of time with us, and I'm grateful. My only suggestion would be when we release materials this dense, to just give them to us a little sooner and schedule the stakeholder sessions a little sooner so we can be more constructive in our comments and less reactive. With that, here are my 3 takeaways from what I've been able to review. And this does relate a little bit back to the prior item. I just think we need to be really careful about these large capital projects given economic uncertainty, tariffs, and inflation. Brick and mortar overruns can erase our reserves in a heartbeat. And, you know, the example is with the Measure C and the newly identified $4.7 million contaminated soil problem at the police department. That was unexpected. That's no one's fault, I know. But when we have projects that cost $122 million and are closer to $200 million when financing is included and are that large, surprises of that magnitude can erase our reserves, you know, year to year. So we need to just manage that really carefully and be really thoughtful. I also really appreciate the incredible creativity of our city staff in trying to avoid across-the-board cuts. I know Kelly described that instead of doing that, she went through this process. I've never seen anything like that from our city. I think it's fantastic. If I had my druthers, I'd prioritize revenue strategies where demand is relatively inelastic and related to luxury-oriented items. And I have a couple of friends who have boats and are going to kill me for saying this, but waterfront boat slips, for example, could generate $1 to $2 million, and I'm very curious about how you're thinking about using that for budget, the general fund budget. I know it's related to enterprise funds, but I think it's an interesting thing for us to consider.
Wrap up.
Yeah, I'm really sorry. Okay, the most important thing is if we're going to pursue a tax, I would really recommend that we do it sooner than later and that the tax be a vacancy tax or a TOT tax. And I'd like it to be dedicated, not a general fund tax, because we've spent quite a bit of time advocating for general fund. It's not efficient. So I hope we do a dedicated tax. Thank you.
Thank you, Ms. Carlos. Next up, Diane Black.
Chair Friedman and members of the committee, my name's Diane Black, and I'm speaking for myself today. I just wanted to make it clear that I truly support measures that would ensure the fiscal stability of the city by enhancing revenue and by providing more efficient services. More specifically, I support pursuing a revenue stream dedicated, it's not going to be a surprise, dedicated solely to providing affordable housing. We should not delay on this and other revenue-generating items, most of which are identified in Tier 3. It takes time to develop revenue sources such as an increased TOT or vacancy tax, and we can't afford to wait several years to start that process. General comments, I just got Invisalign, so if I'm lisping, that's why. Measure C and Measure I seem to be treated differently in the budget, and I really don't understand why. I thought they were both general fund taxes, but it seems like Measure C can only go to certain projects and Measure I can go to anything, so I don't really get that. The second sort of general comment is, please don't fiscalize land use decisions, and there's a specific example that I think does just that. Decisions about major policy issues like short-term rentals shouldn't be made in the context of the budget. They should consider the budget, but they shouldn't be made in the context of the budget. Other recommendations on Tier 1 revenue generation. I really support fees to recover the full cost of permitting services And I think you really ought to take that into consideration, particularly for non-housing and for-profit housing developments. Fee waivers or reductions can be granted for affordable housing and other community benefit projects, but general funds shouldn't subsidize the processing of development projects. On reimbursements, some funding ideas would impact nonprofit organizations, and I would just want us to really consider the effect of those and on revenue for other businesses in town that we're trying to encourage. On reallocations, without a review of the special funds and their revenues and budgets, it's really difficult to evaluate the proposals, and I know you're trying to put everything out there, but it's impossible for me to say that's a good idea or not a good idea. On cost savings and expenditure reductions, seems to be a bit scattered and less defined, and we probably need to spend a bit more time on figuring those out. Tier 2 recommendations, again, seem to need a lot of more definition. It wasn't clear to me why TOT was only being proposed for short-term rentals and not for other transient occupancy or transient lodging. And the library closures during the winter holiday just simply shouldn't happen. I recommend you take that off the list. And then Tier 3 recommendations, again, why wait with the big revenue enhancement ideas when they take time to put into place? So thank you for the opportunity to comment. And I agree with Lisa, we really need more time, because I had a lot more comments, and I can't say them in 3 minutes or however long I got.
Thank you for your comments. Up next, Pat McElroy, and then the final in chambers is Jared Gorin.
Good morning, Chairman Friedman and the rest of the Finance Committee members. My name is Pat McElroy, and I was part of the committee that put Measure C on the ballot in 2017. So it was one of the last things I did when I worked for the city. And I'm not as familiar with Measure I, but I do want to talk about Measure C. 2017, it passed 56-47. It was a simple majority vote, 50% plus one. At the time, 13,000 people voted yes, and we estimated the revenue at $22 million. And from what I can see today, the revenue for the next budgetary year, I believe, is about $36 million. So you've had that added to the general fund. And from what I understand about Measure I, that's another $17 million. So since 2017, the addition to the general fund by these two measures is $51 million. And what I get concerned about is, well, let me read one other paragraph out of the Measure C, or when we were running the election. We stated that Measure C mandates an annual accountability report to detail how funds were utilized in the previous year. Since Measure C revenues are not legally restricted, it is crucial for the community to see that the city is honoring its promise to use these funds for addressing critical infrastructure needs. And I can remember when we were presenting this, we had the then Public Works Director, we had about 30 years, 35 years out of all the projects that they had lined up, because we were in a pretty bad situation with underfunded infrastructure and public works. And I'm afraid that we're starting to slide down to the potential of sliding down a slippery slope of not keeping the promise that we made to the citizens of Santa Barbara. And by we, I mean the people that were on that committee and the city of Santa Barbara, how we were going to use those funds. This is exactly what many people we enlisted to support that measure feared. And that we had to talk to them about why we wanted them to overlook the fact that there was no sunset clause in this measure, and that we would honor the promise that we made. We would do what we said we were going to do. I can't imagine the impact to the general fund losing over $30 million every year if somebody should decide to put a measure on the ballot to sunset Measure C, which somebody is entirely capable of doing. I'm not disputing the value of programs that some folks may want to fund with Measure C monies, but please don't put this critical funding source at risk. As Measure C and I show, the citizens of Santa Barbara will strongly support a measure to improve services in the city. And I'm glad to hear both of you mention that. please consider such a measure for whatever new programs you propose, rather than taking it from a source that was never intended for those uses. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. McElroy. Up next, Jarrett Gorin.
Hi, good afternoon, Jarrett Gorin. I'm speaking as a private citizen today. I'm on the Citizens Oversight Committee for Measure C, but I'm not here on behalf of that committee. And first, I want to just, I agree with everything the previous speaker said. He said most of what I would normally say. Really came down here to sort of get ahead of the ball a little bit and not be as reactive in this case. I see every time something like this comes up, it's becoming normalized for certain members of city council to start eyeballing Measure C as let's just go get some money out of that to cover whatever was the latest new object we needed. And I don't mean to trivialize what people have had to divert some funds to. They're important things. But like in particular, this $500,000 that we need to reimburse into the housing fund, I get really concerned every time something like this goes to council again, because again, there's certain members of council that immediately start talking about going to Measure C and saying things like people over pavement. It's really, Measure C was a promise, and people care if you keep your promises. And I think that in a financial situation like we have here, it isn't impossible that you may be going back to the citizens of Santa Barbara to approve another tax to try to backfill some things. And like the previous speaker said, people are willing to do that if you keep your promises, and they've done that before. And I think for that reason alone, it's really critical that you don't go and touch Measure C. And then finally, I just want to say the degree to which your finance department staff and everybody in the other departments have gone and really looked at things to see where you can scrape any sort of savings and efficiencies out of, it's amazing. That's a huge effort, and I really appreciate it. And I think the community, if they understood what that involves, would really appreciate it. And that's what it's refreshing to see that kind of effort come out of our city government. So those are my comments. Thanks for being here.
Thank you. I'll go to online. Are there any members online who wish to speak?
We
Please
have
raise
two
your hand.
speakers online. We have Linda Honigman and Loy Beardsmore.
Great. And I'm going to close the additional, so those are the only two from online.
Correct. So first up, we have Linda Honigman. Linda Honigman, go ahead.
Thank you. I'm Linda Honigman, an advocate for affordable and livable neighborhoods. I support staff recommendations and appreciate that you had several new budget challenges, and it appears that all city departments contributed many ideas for saving costs and increasing revenues. I'm encouraged that there is interest in exploring an increase in the TOT that could be used for a permanent source for affordable housing funding, and a vacancy tax or transfer tax could be helpful. Thank you.
Thank you. Second speaker is Loy Beardsmore. Please unmute yourself.
Thank you. I appreciate the presentation that staff members presented today. I'm deeply concerned about moving forward with the proposed rent stabilization ordinance without a clear funding plan. Our city's already operating at a deficit despite the passage of Measure I to increase local tax. Ironically, Mr. DeMartini cites the same reasons that you're in a deficit that are the same challenges that housing providers face, leading to housing providers needing to raise rents. You recently raised harbor slip fees by 10%, not 60% of CPI, and it sounds like you may be considering raising them again. Committing additional funding, financial resources that we do not have risks further worsening our position and undermines fiscal responsibility. We need to research other options such as suggested by housing providers and housing developers. Any rent stabilization ordinance and the costs that it would incur, this proposal should be weighed carefully against our current budgetary constraints to avoid pushing the city further into debt. So as this is considered today, I hope that the Finance Committee will weigh in on how we're going to be able to move such an ordinance forward without the finances behind it. Thank you.
Thank you. That concludes public comment. So I'm going to bring it back to my colleagues first. If you do have questions for today, please feel free to ask. But then also, what are thoughts? My recommendation, after talking with staff, and for the same reasons that some of the commenters today, this is a really enormous task, and there's a lot of recommendations. And just hearing the public comment, hearing the staff presentation will give us a better frame of reference. And we have the ability to take an extra week and be more deliberative and thoughtful in the presentations rather than trying to rush them in about a half an hour. And being that this is coming to council and it really sets the financial picture for the city going forward, continuing this item to next week makes sense to me. So with that, I'll open up to any questions, comments, clarifications, and then I'm going to ask Mr. DeMartini if you can help kind of focus us if we decide that we want to have the meeting for next week. Member Harmon.
Thank you, Chair Friedman. I do have some questions, but I'll start with that point. I totally agree with you and agree with the public commenters. I think there is so much here that is so important that it makes very good sense. I think, though, and this is where maybe another process question comes in, the way that I had understood it before public comment is that we would close public comment, and then return to Finance Committee next week for maybe some more questions and deliberations. And I'm wondering if there's some process way that we can keep public comment open, because I do feel, I was moved by the comment. I agree. I have that same sense that I need some more time to explore this. Would it be possible for us to do another public comment and then we go into deliberations?
Chair Harmon, you do have that option. You have the option now to close it because it's a continuation, but you have the discretion to also open it if you want to.
Awesome, thank you. So to Chair Friedman, I think that would be my request, and it's just important enough, and it's so meaty that I would really appreciate that. So just a couple initial questions. I am confident that I will have more questions next week. So first, on the revenue-generating tax-related options, the vacancy tax, that's not revenue generating, right? I mean, the way that it's sort of been described to me is that it's really more about changing behavior. And so I just want to get clarity around that here.
Yes, Committee Member Harmon would be happy to explain that more. The way a vacancy tax works is it is an additional tax on properties that are vacant, but it is really designed to change behavior. And so when a property becomes occupied, the tax actually goes away. And so it's not a tax that is designed to generate revenue in perpetuity. It's designed to change behavior, and then when that behavior is changed, the tax goes away. It's also very administratively burdensome to administer a tax like that. We need to have staff that evaluate when properties are vacant. There's probably like an annual registration type process. There's a lot of research that goes into it. It's also a tax that hasn't been implemented successfully in jurisdictions that have tried. I think only a handful of jurisdictions have a vacancy tax in the state of California. And so it's not a broad tax that a lot of cities go after.
And is
so
that
those are some reasons.
because of legislative or rather judicial efforts to stop it, or why is it's just not popular? Or?
I think it's just from what Mr. DeMartini indicated, it's administratively burdensome, and it hasn't really generated any revenue and I think staff is not recommending that, and we haven't recommended that previously just because of the additional administrative burden of doing that. I think what is new on here that has been proposed is looking at a real property transfer tax increase, which could apply at higher levels of sales prices to homes. And so anytime a home transfers, that tax would be paid, and that could be an ongoing revenue stream, which if we're looking at ways to balance the city's budget, that is a more appropriate tax measure to look at than a vacancy tax. A vacancy tax would be a policy shift. It's not a budget balancing option.
Okay.
So just to clarify.
Yeah, thank you. That's very helpful context, I think, for all of us to have as we think about these. So on the note of the real property transfer tax, so I apologize. I don't have my glasses, and so I kind of can't. I guess I've reached that threshold finally. Like for the first time, I'm like trying to read this. So it may be on here, and I missed it. But what about a library parcel tax? Is that on here? And is that something that we've explored? And if it's not, I would love to, look, I realize like the collective breath went out of the room when I said those words. I understand, but I think it's worth considering, and I'm wondering if you guys could speak to that and where your thinking is on that.
Sure, Councilmember Harmon, thank you. So it's not currently on the list. It's a great idea to explore. If council gives us direction, we can assess it and analyze it. If it's a special, and it wouldn't be a tax, but like an assessment, we'd have to consider the type of approval from the properties being assessed, what's required for it, the administrative processes around that, and we probably want to do some initial like polling to sort of understand if that would be a good measure. So those are some considerations. Some of the things that we evaluated with all the other sort of revenue measures that we looked at fairly recently.
Awesome. Yeah, I don't want to, I'm not going to go deeply here into comments, but I'm very interested in learning more about that and seeing what that could look like for us. We all love our libraries, and I think a lot of us would be willing to pay for them. And then my final question for today is just on the slip fees price increase. I'm so interested because the dollar figure is really big, but I also know that we are one of the last coastal jurisdictions with affordable slips, and I think there's an access issue there that there's just maybe a little counterbalance. And I'm wondering, Director Wiltshire, or just if you can speak to that and where you think our boating community would be, and then also, would these increases have to go to Coastal Commission or not? Because I know we're talking about this a lot at Coastal sort of writ large, but I don't know if we're doing specifically.
Chair Friedman, Commissioner Harmon, Mike Wiltshire, City's Waterfront Director. I want to start this by saying this was like early steps of a very theoretical process. And so
all boaters, you can relax.
so very, very theoretical. There's no secret that there's been decades and decades of essentially infinite demand for slips in our harbor. And so this was just an economic effort of if we balance that with the market demand versus what our pricing is. We survey 18 to 20 harbors annually, collecting data on parking fees, all sorts of stuff. We are typically on the lower end for our monthly fees. I wouldn't say it's affordable to get a slip in Santa Barbara Harbor because there's this whole other nuanced piece of the way the economics works down there with essentially private-to-private transactions. So this would also be an economic way to reduce that initial private-to-private transaction and bring those dollars back to the city and the waterfront.
So that brings up a really, really good point. The private-to-private transactions. Is there some, and I'm totally speaking off the cuff, so legally this may just not be possible, but can we put in place some kind of framework where we get a percentage of those transactions? I mean,
We have, and so this has been run through multiple grand juries, State Lands Commission,
good.
all the way back to the 80s. And so our slip transfer fee was designed as a large enough portion of that transaction to kind of limit and prohibit that profiting off the transfer. It doesn't.
But they still do, right?
They still do.
And isn't it a flat fee, not a percentage?
It is a flat fee.
So could we do a percentage?
We don't currently have any insight into the deal transaction. And so that occurs privately, and we don't request that data. We don't track it. We're not like the DMV where they ask when you buy a used car, how much did it cost? It would be difficult to garner all that information. We could ask, and we could tie it to that, but it would be hard if somebody was not truthful or.
Yeah, I mean, I think this is a much larger conversation. I'm looking at our city attorney, and maybe we can brainstorm over this. But I think like one simple go forward solution is when we grant slip fees, we write into the agreement that any transfer requires city participation. Like I understand the folks that already have their slips, we're probably not going to claw back. I just don't see how that's feasible. But on a go-forward basis, maybe there's some opportunity. And I see it all the time. I see it particularly down in Orange County. People are, and their whole life savings are in the transfer of these slips. I mean, it's remarkable, and I think there might be some opportunity for us to think really creatively. Again, it's a very long tail item, but I'm interested in it, and I think there's opportunity.
And we have a lot of eyes on it. I'm happy to speak at length with anybody who wants to speak about it, but there's an enormous history there. And this is kind of one economic-based way of dealing with that. If you look at somebody getting into something, it's their willingness to pay. So they're willing to
Yeah.
pay that transfer fee, they're willing to pay a private party, and they're willing to pay our monthly fees. If we shift that towards monthly fees over time, then inherently that willingness to pay on the private party will go down. We'll recoup more of that revenue, and so it's kind of like an economic solution and a way to get there over time.
But are
if
we
were to
sure
do
that
it.
we're getting more out of the monthly fees versus taking an approach that would take a percentage? Like, do we want to stop those large transactions if we can actually get a piece of that pie in a meaningful way? Have we done the math, I guess?
Just at a really high level, if you look at the economics, the harbors near us have slips available. You can show up there and there's no transfer, there's no buying. You show up to Ventura and say, can I have a slip? They say yes, and you pay them a monthly fee. If you look in some crazy scenario where Santa Barbara was that way, that would mean the market had dictated what our monthly fee should be, and we would be maximizing that revenue perfectly.
That makes sense, yeah. Okay, thank you. Yeah, I would love to talk more about this at some point. Thank you. That's all for me for today.
Member Santa
Thank you, Chair Friedman. I wanted very briefly to second Councilmember or Committee Member Harmon's recommendation to extend public comment into next week. I do think that we all need some time to digest this, and as far as these recommendations go, thank you to our staff. I mean, it does not go unnoticed, the incredible work and time and effort that has gone into this. I'm very glad that our staff has also clarified where it would be more feasible and probably more fiscally responsible to approach a tax, especially if we're looking at our upcoming election cycle that is next year. I think that if we're going to go for anything, it has to be something that'll generate the most revenue. And, you know, we can talk about it being dedicated or general, we can have those conversations. But I do think that a property transfer tax really does seem like something very much worth exploring, and would love to just flag this for our staff as, personally for me as a committee member, would be one of my priorities for us to look into. What is the feasibility for us as a city or as a council to put this on the ballot and take it to the voters as soon as possible? I'm very much in favor also of Chair Friedman's recommendation. Let's definitely continue this into next week. So if you need a motion to, let me know.
All right, thank you. Great initial discussion. First, definitely supportive of keeping the public comment open for next week so we can have additional comments for those who want to participate, as well as other thoughts that might come up from the colleagues at the library, parcel tax or other means. The library ladies were definitely they were definitely over there as cheerleaders. So, or other ideas that might come up in the next week that we want to consider. Just a couple clarifications on the tier 3. It does say not recommended at this time. However, for the discussion purposes, being that taxes such as a TOT or other type of tax would need to be on a ballot, a general election ballot, as I understand it, in an even year, so it'd be 26. It takes a lot of time to pursue those, so if we wanted to recommend it, we would actually want to do that work now, so not recommended at this time seems a little bit off to me.
So I think what we did was the staff made a recommendation that we would recommend looking at the real property transfer tax versus increasing TOT or UUT at this point. And so these are the staff recommendations. I mean, I think what might be the best idea is to sort of poll on all 3 of them preliminarily and see kind of where the community is on any of those 3 options. Just recognizing that, you know, with the transient occupancy tax, that directly impacts our tourism industry and our hoteliers, who are still, you know, I think there's just still sort of recovery from COVID and the economic downturn. So we were looking at other ways to generate revenue, but also balancing out the different elements of the city's economy and budget. And so I think that's why staff was saying, let's look at the real property transfer tax as the preferred option. But, you know, ultimately the committee and council could say, you know, poll on that and TOT and UUT increase and look at all 3 and see what's the most feasible. And library, apparently, which we did not have on our list, was not on our radar screen, but we could also look at that as well. But again, and then I think looking at thresholds of, if we wanted to have it as a dedicated revenue stream to a certain purpose, it would have to get 2/3 versus a simple majority. And so kind of where do those taxes fall in that threshold calculation?
Perfect. So we could have that discussion with the different measures next week.
Correct.
On that. I just wanted to be sure the way it was framed, not recommended.
It's not,
that we can.
just because of that sort of balancing out the different components of the city's economy, and kind of given the concerns around housing and sort of speculative real estate transactions, the real property transfer tax might be a better option to pursue first, while still generating a significant amount of revenue.
Okay, and then also just a clarification, a lot of these didn't have any cost components. You mentioned this in the presentation, but just wanted to articulate that the reason for that is some of these, the finance committee or the council as a whole might not want to pursue those, so we didn't want to allocate the staff resources, which could be very intensive for some of these if it was something that was not supported even looking at from the beginning.
Yes, Chairman Friedman, that is correct.
And then the last is, as we go forward through the process of looking at our expenditures and others, and we're getting into the specific enterprise funds. We were just talking about slip fees, there's airport. If there is a way that those commissions could be involved, once the specific items that the finance and council recommend to get some feedback from those commissions at those times going forward, it gives the expertise of those commissions, I'm thinking airport, harbor, and others, but it also, water, but it also allows public comment on those specific areas as well. So, but we need to really kind of find what we want to focus on before we go to those commissions. And then the last thing I want to say before we do the motion is there is the issue that the budget deficit has grown even with the passage of Measure I. But Measure I is extremely important, and I want to thank the public for supporting it, because without Measure I, we wouldn't have the ability right now, we wouldn't have the time to go through this thoughtful and deliberative process of looking at our expenditures, looking at other revenue options. We would have to be making pretty drastic service cuts at the time. So what it has allowed us to do is it shored up our public safety, as we saw in the beginning of this. We were able to really become competitive with other agencies again. So it has delivered on public safety, and it allows us the time to look at these other priorities, housing, libraries, parks, and others. And that is the benefit of it right now. So it's important that we understand it within the city, but also the residents understand the extreme importance of passages and the benefits that it's providing us right now, which allows us to do this work and hopefully come to a better place without having drastic service reductions on that. So, Mr. DeMartini, if you could help us just kind of for next week, what would you recommend in terms of how we can focus strategically, rather than us going 1 through 200 and looking at each one of those? What would you do to help us kind of synthesize our thoughts that we can have a productive meeting and get us to where we need to go?
Sure. So for the lucky committee member that's going to make the motion, I think what might be easiest would be to sort of make a motion approving of staff recommendations, the different tiers, and maybe calling out specific items that are of utmost priority for you to have staff work on more immediate than other items. That would be helpful for us to know so we can get to work on them quicker. And then also identifying recommendations that you do not want us to pursue. So that can be all part of the same motion as opposed to going one by one by one.
And I would, just to add on to that, pursuant to the last conversation, also if there's specific direction on a ballot measure, which is kind of a whole separate work stream, that recommendation be made to council as well. And I think, but Mr. DeMartini laid out the rest very, very clearly, what we're looking for.
Okay, so we can make the motion basically what Mr. DeMartini just said right there. Is come back next week. We'll keep public comment open, so we'll have public comment again, and then the finance committee will focus on priority items that we have. Also those that we say not at this time, and then any potential ballot measures that we want to look at and have further study and have that discussion next week, and then that will get recommended on to council. Did I miss anything? All right, is there a motion to that effect? Or any comments first, yeah.
Sorry, just one brief question. For the direction, so for next week, when we identify which ones we are recommending focus on, can you give me a sense of what is realistic in terms of how many things we can focus on? Because I promise you, I can come up with a big list. Like, do you want, should I be targeting 5? Should I be, I don't quite have the right context. Thank you.
Committee Member Harmer, let me maybe phrase it a little bit of a different way. So maybe if there are maybe 5 like high priority items, that would be helpful to know. But that also still means that staff is going to work on the bulk of all the other recommendations too. They will run their own course, right? There will be lots of department staff that will be working on lots of them individually and in group settings. So hopefully that's helpful to answer your question.
That is very helpful. Thank you. And Chair Friedman, I'm happy to make a motion to continue this item to next week if that's what we need right now.
Motion has been made based on the parameters set forth. Is there a second?
Second.
Second has been made. All in favor? Aye. No opposed, no abstentions, passes unanimously, and we will see you all here next week. Thank you all.